Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate everybody coming along. Apologies for the technical delays on my part. As you can see, firstly, we need to start off with a bit of an apology. My name is not Amy Babinchak. She was the one planned to present this information to you, but she has been unavailable due to an emergency situation. So I'm filling in for her. You can find information about her at Third Tier, and there is her LinkedIn profile as well. My name is Robert Crane. I am also a Microsoft MVP, and you can find me if you do wish to ask me anything specifically at Director CIA, but please feel free to always contact Amy directly for this. Now, obviously, this is part of a major event here, and we do encourage people to donate for the support of UNICEF. It goes a long way in these times. So if you can spare an amount of money for those people, that'd be fantastic. There's a QR code there. I'll give you a moment or two just to grab that, and please do support the cause. It's a very, very worthwhile cause. Now, don't forget that we also have sponsors as well. So these people help make these events and also obviously donate time and effort into creating an event for you and for the charity here. So again, take a moment to look through all of those and do please support those as part of this endeavour. Now, as mentioned, this presentation has been created by Amy Babinchak. The best contact for her is amy@thirdtier.net. You'll find her also on the LinkedIn, which is probably the best idea. She runs a business, Harbour Computer Services, out of Michigan in the US. So again, take a moment to have a look at Amy's details and don't be afraid to reach out and contact her about any further information. Now, what we're here to talk about basically is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the US has basically put out an alert here. Now, what the alert is aimed at trying to make people aware of is the fact that many people are moving to the cloud. In particular, they're moving to Microsoft 365. They're doing that at a very fast rate at this point in time to get up and to be able to be working in this current pandemic we face. Now, that means that a lot of them have stood up these tenants very quickly. They may not have implemented all the security and all the functions in an effort to make their employees productive. So what the agency is trying to make you aware of by putting out this informational guide that you can have a look at that URL is the things that you need to really pay attention to make sure that you have the best security for your tenant. Because it's all well and good to give people the ability to be productive and work with information, but if that is not secured and people are working in remote places, it's going to be much harder to track down any issues that you might have with the environment. So it's very, very important that in these times when we wanted to get things up and running and people working remotely and using fantastic tools like Teams, that we have the ability to make sure that we have our information secured. And we don't want the tenants to be the subject of an attack. So again, the agency here has basically gone through and is trying to bring to our attention the basic things that need to be done. Now, there is a list of them, and Amy has provided some additional ones on that, but some typical ones are around enabling MFA, logging, monitoring, to limit the exposure that the tenant does have to the environment. Now, if we have a look at that list, you'll see that it's shown here. We've got enable multi-factor authentication. We've got the ability to make sure that our logging is also enabled. We want to disable what's known as legacy protocols. So these are protocols that aren't that don't have a lot of security around. They're very old internet-based protocols that were never designed with security in mind. We want to make sure that we have our roles locked down and only the right people have access to the right information. We want to also be alerted and informed of when there may be suspicious activity, and we can look at a tool like Microsoft Secure Score to help us become secure now and also into the future. Now, we can also take the information that comes from our Office 365 environment and send that to our SIEM tool as well. Now, what Amy has provided here is a number of additional items here that she has indicated are very important and should be considered along with the list as well. So they include creating a break glass account so that you do have a fallback administrator account you can use. Make sure that you extend your logging. Make sure that you understand who actually has legacy auth. Maybe it is required with older things like multifunction printers and so on. Limit your emails and make sure that you control and set up those policies. So a lot of the attacks that we see today basically are initiated or brought to users through emails. The more that we can restrict and control and lock down that vector, the better off we're going to be in that environment. So a lot of those additional options there are around really making sure that we have a good handle on our email environment. Now, what we want to do here is just give you a bit of a feel for the environment, what's possible, what you can do, look at a tenant. Now, I will say beforehand that you need to appreciate that different tenants have different capabilities. Different SKUs have different features. So I'll hopefully try and point those out where there are some major differences, but assume from what you see that most of the tenants basically will have what you see. So the first place that we want to really start is, okay, what about enabling MFA and what is known as conditional access? So if we swap across to our demo tenant here, what we see is we've got a standard login. We've logged in as an administrator to our environment. Now, what you will find is that each user also has their own My Account portal. Now, you get to this via myworkaccount.microsoft.com. You log in with your normal Microsoft 365 credentials, and on the left-hand side there, you'll see a range of information, including what devices you're using, the ability to change your password. But in there, you will also see that we have this option here for security information and security setup. Now, you'll see that we have the option here to go into additional security verification options here. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to go and set up multi-factor authentication for us as an individual user. So I've logged in as a user, I've gone in to the My Profile area, then I'm going to basically step through the requirements here. So what I would then do, for example, is that I would just follow the bouncing ball here, and I can then start setting up the multi-factor authentication. Now that could be something like the Microsoft app. It could also be an SMS phone call. It could be a phone call back, whatever you want. So again, we can go in here and we can select from our options. So the options we've got here are the mobile app, for example, and do we want to receive a notification? So push notification, or do we want to use a verification code? We would select that, and then we would go in and basically do the setup from there. What will typically happen now is we'll see a QR code. We would scan the QR code in with our Authenticator app. All right, so we would scan that in with the Microsoft Authenticator app in there, and then that would then set up a rolling set of digits that we can then use to do multi-factor authentication. Now, any user can do this. They can launch this, as I said, from that standard portal, the myworkaccount.microsoft.com, plus get a lot of other really good information. Obviously, you need to make sure, or you should ensure, that your administrators have multi-factor authentication out of the box immediately. So they should set it up straight away. Now, once the administrators have done this, how do we basically go through and set it up for users? So if we go into the admin center, the Microsoft 365 admin center, we go into our active users, you'll see that we can go in and select an individual user here and look at their unique properties. Now, in their unique properties, if we scroll down the bottom, you'll see that we've got an option here called Manage Multi-Factor Authentication. Now, if we select that, what that's going to bring up for us is the ability to do a bulk configuration of MFA for our environment. So this is going to allow us to go through and select all the users in our environment and require that they go in and set up the MFA. So you'll see here that what I've got is, you see I have a list of users here. So I can go in and, for example, select Deborah, and then up here I can go in and select the option to enable MFA. So what that will mean is next time Deborah logs in, she'll be taken through the process of setting up MFA for the environment, making sure that she is good to go there. Now we can also manage the user's individual settings there, and up the top here, we also have an option called service settings. Now that, remember, is going to allow us as an admin to control some aspects of how we go in and set up MFA. So you'll see here that we can determine whether users have the ability to use app passwords. We also have the ability to do some trusted IPs if we have that capability. And then down the bottom, you'll see that we can select which methods are available to users. So is calling a phone number considered MFA? Is a text message? Is notification through a mobile app? So you can go in as administrator and you can control that and maybe say, look, I don't want my users to receive an SMS, a text. I only want them to have notification on a mobile app. So you can control that access quickly and easily. Now, the way that we did that, once again, we went into our active users, we picked an active user, scrolled down, and we found the Manage Multi-Factor Authentication option, and that then took us to this area to allow us to go in and configure the environment for all the users. Now, of course, this is not the only way that we can require users to have the MFA. We can use something like called security defaults. Now, what security defaults does will apply a policy and a number of other options to our users and force them to do MFA. Now, if we go into our Azure AD here, so I've logged into the Azure AD as a administrator here. So if I see my backend identity options here, if I go down and have a look at properties and scroll right down the bottom, you will see that there's an option here called Manage Security Defaults. Now, if I select that, you'll see that you have the ability to go in here and enable security defaults. Right now, it's not very granular. You've got on or off. Now, if we actually click on the link here to learn a bit more about it, what we'll find is that security defaults, when you scroll down here, you'll see that it will enforce a number of policies and it will enforce a unified MFA registration. So what that's also going to do for you, rather than you going in and selecting it manually, you can enable security defaults. It will basically force the users to do a MFA enrollment within 14 days by default. Now, also just be careful here that what the security defaults will also do is a number of other things besides MFA, and one of these is the blocking of legacy authentication, which we'll come to. All right, so again, remember that if you do want to do this in an automated way rather than going in through the console, you can go in and enable security defaults in there to do that. Now, of course, one of the big challenges here is going to be making sure that users have the right abilities, the right permissions. Now, if we go in and have a look at a user here, you'll see that we've got the option in the user settings to manage the roles. Now, we again want to make sure that we abide by the least privilege option. So we want to make sure that we target our users with the permissions that they need. Now, obviously, not everybody needs to be a global administrator, and even so, a lot of people may not need to be anything more than an Exchange admin, or maybe they want to be a global reader. So that allows us to look at the properties but not make changes. Maybe they want to be able to be a user admin, so they can change users' passwords, but for example, not be able to delete a user. So what we want to do is make sure that we do target these roles to the people that need them. We can do that at any point. We can change their roles quickly and easily. So if we go in here and have a look at our users, you'll see that we can go in here and select the filter, and we can easily filter and see, okay, well, who are our help desk admins in this environment? Doesn't look as though we've got any. And maybe if we go to our billing admins, let's see if we've got anybody there. Nope. So again, what we can do here is we can set up the admins to meet the organizational requirements. You'll see in here that we have a number of users. We can also look in here and determine whether a user has their sign-in blocked or sign-in allowed as well. All right, so we can control all the user stuff by basically going into the admin center and selecting the user. This is for the individual user. We can control their MFA, we can control their roles, all of that sort of stuff we can do ourselves as an administrator. Now, one of the things to remember here is that if we do turn on multi-factor authentication for our environment, there may be a challenge or there may be an issue if for some reason that administrator that you've set up that has enabled MFA basically has some sort of access problem. So let's say, for example, that the MFA capabilities with Microsoft 365 are unavailable, or the user has lost their token, or something's going strange with that account. How is that account going to be able to get into the environment to do any administration if there are problems? So one of Amy's recommendations, and also Microsoft, is to have a break glass admin account. Now, what we mean by break glass is, again, this is typically going to be an emergency account. What that means is that this is only going to be used as a last resort here. So what that means is it's going to be an account that is created, set up, and it will have some unique properties. Probably you want a nonsense username, so something people can't guess. Don't make it administrator, don't make it admin at, because what's going to happen is the bad actors are going to be banging away trying to guess this. You want to have the maximum password length that is possible with Azure AD, 250 characters. So you're going to want to make it really, really hard for people to get in, because the password in our break glass account is really what's going to be protecting our environment. There's not going to be MFA on it to, again, get around any issues that happen with MFA. You also want to make sure that it is a global admin, so it has the rights to set properties if it needs to, exclude it from any policy, so it is standalone, and then set up an alert. You can set up alerts inside the environment a number of different ways that will tell you when someone logs into that account. So you want to know when someone logs into your break glass account. Hopefully it's you or someone you know that's accessing that, but if it's not, then that account may have been compromised. So remember, this account has a little bit less security, I suppose, because it doesn't have MFA, but it's going to be that backdoor that does allow you, in case of an emergency, in case you need to get in and do something. Now, remember, best practice is to have at least one break glass account. There are some people who would recommend having two, up to you to determine what works for you, but you should have at least one, because if you set up things like MFA and conditional access and all this security, it is possible to lock yourself out. It may happen, and you don't want to have no option to be able to get back into your account. Even Microsoft would struggle to get into an account that has been basically completely locked out of the environment. So remember, best practice is at least one break glass account. Make sure that it is something that's not easy to guess as an account name. It doesn't have access basically to any, or it's not part of any policies, but it has a really, really complex password. And you also set up an alert to let you know when that account is being used. Now, once we've got our MFA, the next thing we want to talk about and think about is what's known as conditional access. Now, conditional access is a situation that is evaluated when the user has logged in. So basically, when a user puts their login and their password into the environment, then they would have to pass through what's known as conditional access. Now, typically, conditional access is a feature of Azure AD P1, so it is an included feature of Azure AD P1. It is also included in Microsoft 365 Business Premium, and also things like Microsoft 365 E3 and E5. So it's not available on the basic Microsoft 365 basic or standard, but you would need a minimum of Microsoft 365 Business Premium to be able to do conditional access here. So what we do is we can find our conditional access policies basically out in a number of different places. I like to basically go to the security area here inside my Azure portal. You'll see that there is an option here called conditional access. Now, when we go in here, remember, conditional access is something that is policy based. It's about setting up policies to determine how people get access to our environment. Now, we can have multiple policies. We can have policies that are targeted at specific users. we can have policies that are targeted at specific devices. So when a user uses maybe a mobile device, they are subject to a different conditional access policy. So we can determine all this and then set those in place. Now, one of the first things that you should think about doing is setting up what's called a named location. So what I've done here, I've gone and created a location here that I trust. Now let's go in and create a new location as an example. Now you'll see here I can give the location a name. So let's call it an office location. And then if I want, I can go in and I can specify particular IP ranges that is going to be associated with that location. So for example, if an environment, a company is working behind a static IP or they're working behind a number of known static IP addresses, you can put those in as a location-based IP, all right? So typically the way you do it is you set up location for the office and then you put the IP that office uses as the known location. Now you'll see here that we've also got the option here to select countries if we want. So we can go in here and we can choose from a range of countries here. So for example, if I put my sister country here in New Zealand, so what I can do is I can now specify the office location here as being the country of New Zealand. Now, obviously, the IP addresses in that country are relatively known, and that is going to allow me to then target these conditional access policies. You'll see that I've also got the option here. I can select to include unknown areas as well. So these are areas that aren't mapped to a country or region. So basically what I've done here, you'll see that I've created a location called Australia. I've included only the IP addresses from that country location. Now, what I'm good is I'm able to go in and create a policy. So if I go in here and I look at creating a conditional access policy, so let's go in and go, I want to create a new policy. All right, so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to call this demo. Now, when I create a policy, I'm going to potentially target that policy at users. Okay, so one of the options is to include set of users. So let me say that I want to include all users in this policy. You'll notice that I also get the ability to exclude users as well. So maybe you want your users who are internal to the business, they are required to go through this policy, where people who are associated with your team from outside the business don't have to go through that. So you can include and exclude people. Then the next option here is we can include and exclude our cloud apps, right? So at the moment we can go in here and we can say all cloud apps, or we can go in and do selected apps in here. So when we do select our cloud apps, you'll see what I'll get here is I get the ability to select things like going to Office 365. I get the ability to go to a number of things that are in my Azure AD here. So I can target these down to individual cloud apps, but normally you set that to be all cloud apps. Now, again, here's the warning, don't lock yourself out. So remember, that's why we have our break glass account there. The conditions that I'm going to set here. So this is how the policy is going to be evaluated. Now I can evaluate conditional access on a risk policy. So this is linked with the Defender ATP environment. The risky sign-ins is something with identity protection, Azure ADP2. We can also do it on devices. So what we can do is we can say, okay, I'm going to configure this on any device, or maybe I just want to target this to my Android users rather than anybody else, because maybe I consider Android not to be as secure as other mobile apps. So we can target it to devices. And here's where we go in and target our locations. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do what may seem as counterintuitive. I'm going to include every location, and I'm actually going to go in here and exclude that named location that I created, right? So just hang on and I'll show you why I do this. So I'm going to exclude trusted IPs and the location that I wanted, okay, in this rule. So I'm happy with that, hopefully. And then what I'm going to do is I'm also able to target the client apps. Now, is it going to be working in a browser? Do I want to target this policy in a browser, to mobile apps, to ActiveSync clients, to other clients? Now, other clients are going to be things that use our legacy protocols, POP, IMAP, and SMTP, which are going to allow us to block our legacy protocols if we want. And then we can also target the device state, which means is it compliant or not. Now here is the item here. Now what I'm actually going to do is the access control I'm going to set to block. All right, so what that means is that when I look at my conditions, what that means is I'm going to have the condition of block every location except for the ones that I've already set up. So this means it's going to block every location in the world except for the country of Australia for me to log in. So again, think of it like a firewall. You can set up the policy as a way to basically prevent people from logging in except in the locations that you nominate. But if you wanted to, you create the policy and you can grant people access and require them to do MFA and all these options here. So there's lots of options for you to go in and set up with your conditional access policy. Once you've set all that up, down the bottom, you'll see you've got the option to report only, to turn it on, and to leave it off if you want. So generally you would set it to report only so that you know what's going on. Now, once you've set your conditional access policy, there is an option here that allows you to go in and do a what if analysis. So you can go in and say, okay, which user am to allow you to determine whether the user has been impacted by the policy that you have set. All right. So a quick example of that is if I go into a quick private window here, and if I try and log into my own production Microsoft 365 environment. Now I'm actually on a virtual machine here that is based in the US. So you'll see that I'm going to attempt to log in here. It's going to take me through the standard MFA as it always does. All right, so again, it's going to accept my login, but you should see, fingers crossed, that I have now done a successful login and verification of my identity, but then the conditional access will kick in, and it says here, I don't have access because this virtual machine is in the US. I have a conditional access policy inside my own production tenant that prevents logins from anywhere except my country of origin being Australia. So that is an example of what you can do with conditional access here. So again, remember, conditional access is generally an add-on to most tenants. It comes with Business Premium, E3 and E5 is part of Azure AD P1. And again, you can access it a number of different ways, but the way I got to it is I went into my Azure AD and then I went into security, and then I went into the conditional access option and I set up the policies. Now, again, be very careful with the policies. You don't want to accidentally go in and lock yourself out. Conditional access is really, really powerful. Remember also that conditional access is something that will be evaluated after a successful login. So it's not going to prevent, you know, people just throwing passwords at your environment. Sure, it's security, but conditional access is evaluated after successful login. So the first line of protection is going to be the password. The next line of protection is going to be multi-factor authentication. Then you want to add conditional access. So if they get through those first two layers, you can, again, prevent them from getting in outside the country of origin and using any devices or locations or apps that you basically have not gone in and approved. So we've covered off here enabling multi-factor authentication, creating a break glass account. We've talked about the ability to sign our administrator roles. So what we want to do is we want to go in and talk a little bit more about this legacy protocol, and I have mentioned the security defaults. Now, the first thing that we're going to need to do is find out who is using our legacy protocol. So what we do, again, we go into our Azure AD, we scroll down here and we have a look at our sign-ins. Right, so these will show us all the sign-on, sign-ins for our environment. All right, so there's a nice long log of things that are going in here. Now, the advice is that what you need to do is go in here to columns, and you want to basically go in and add the client app file here. Right, you'll see that you've also got a conditional access line here as well. So let me just tidy that up to make it a bit less broad. So now that we've added the ability to do the client app, what we'll do is we'll add the filter in here. We'll go in and select client app. so that we can now do a filter. And now when we select the filter, you'll see here that we have a list of what is considered modern authentication clients and what is considered legacy authentication clients. Now, if you have a look down this list of legacy authentication clients, you'll see things like IMAP, POP, again, unsecured SMTP, you'll see Exchange Active Sync, EWS. So basically, once we enable that and we filter by that, we can select which options, and let's have a look. And in this case, none of my users are using those legacy protocols. Now, it's important to have a look at this and see which accounts may be using legacy to authenticate. Typically, what you find are third-party, on-prem, older style apps, things like multifunction printers, maybe old accounting packages that are sending emails. Those sort of things can be using basic authentication or legacy authentication. Now, you'll have to have a look at that and deal with those, upgrade them, or work a way around that, because one of the problems with legacy authentication is the fact that it allows basically a login and a password, right? So another little thing I would suggest here is that if you go in here and add a filter, and let's go in here and do a filter basically for status. All right, so if I do a filter for status and set that to failure, what that's going to show me is it's going to show me any failures to log into the environment. Now, what we see is when we get a password spray attack is that an attacker uses a known email address and then it just throws random passwords. So if you do have legacy auth enabled and you have a look at the failures in your environment, you'll probably see lots and lots of failures from countries that are not your own. So they're typically using things like POP and IMAP to try and get into your environment. Now, as mentioned, the quick and easy way to go in and disable legacy auth is to go down here and select the security defaults. And as I said, if I select that to yes, that will disable legacy auth for all the users, all connections. It's not particularly granular, so you've got to be prepared for that. As mentioned, another approach that you could take to block legacy auth could be to use conditional access. So you could go in and select conditional access and say, right, only allow modern client applications to connect to my environment. Don't use unknown, older style connections. So you can block the connections also using conditional access, probably a little bit more work, but allows you to be a bit more granular. The other options that you do have is you can use PowerShell to run a number of commands to set up policies that will control who has legacy auth or turn it off for the whole organization. So there's a range of options that you have available to you to basically achieve that control of legacy protocols. But one of the big things you really need to do is to disable those, especially for all users that don't need them, simply because it is such an easy way for people to try and guess passwords, and those legacy protocols are on by default. All right, so again, we've run through that. We've looked at all those options. We've talked about disabling legacy auth. We've talked about the limiting login by country. So one of the other things we need to do is make sure that we have our logging enabled, right? So this is going to give us the information about what's happening in our tenant. So the way that we find that is if we go into basically, what's happened here? So let me close that one. If we go into this area here and let's go in, oh, not that one. Let us go in and select the policy area that I want to have a look at. Now, the very first thing that you should be doing is to make sure that you have your logging turned on. Now, where you find that is you would go into the search down here, and you will see there's an option here called Audit Log Search. Now, in this tenant, you'll notice that it'll come up in a sec. You'll see that the audit log searching is not enabled. So it's going to come up in a sec and basically say, look, you haven't turned it on, you should go and do it. So what you need to do is make sure that you go into the Security and Compliance Center, go into the Audit Log Search under Search, and make sure that there is no banner that appears up the top here that says that your Audit Log Search is not enabled. Because in here, this is where we're going to go in if we need to, for example, go in and see what people are doing, what options are again happening here in the background. Let me just refresh this page because it didn't come up for some reason. So go in here and make sure that you don't have a banner across the top. It would have been nice if it had displayed to actually allow me to show you that, but make sure that you do go in and verify that and enable any login there, and that will capture those logs from all sorts of places. Now, there is logging for things like emails, for mailboxes, for users, for SharePoint, for OneDrive. Again, make sure that you do go in and turn all of this sort of stuff on, because you want to have all that information feeding into all the different tools that Microsoft has that allow you to analyze those logs. Oh, finally, there it is. So again, you'll see here under Audit Log Search, you'll see that I've now got a banner here that says it's not turned on. The events aren't being audited, so I can't go in and do a search on. So make sure then your tenant that you don't see this banner and your auditing is enabled. You can also do this with PowerShell. Now, you can also bring these logs into your own SIEM. So I'm running out of time here. I'm going to skip through this, but if you do have an existing SIEM, you can go in and suck those in basically by creating an Azure AD app using the APIs and then using Cloud App Security. So Cloud App Security generally is an add-on to the environment. I'll show you that shortly. So let me just quickly show you what that looks like on another tenant. So I have another tenant here, and this is Cloud App Security. So basically what's happening here is all the logging that we get for our tenant is being piped into Cloud App Security. And what we do in Cloud App Security in a nutshell is we go and implement our policies. And our policies allow us to determine what's going to happen in our logging. So for example, this one here, this is basically a activity policy that looks at how many downloads have occurred in the last minute. So if there's more than 50, it's going to generate an alert. Now, if I have a look at the alerts here, you'll see that I have a whole range of alerts telling me things like failed logins from external users, global admin access. So let's go and have a look at that. The information it provides here is quite detailed. It's going to tell me, for example, who the user was, where the location is. It's also going to tell me things like the IP address. All right, so it's going to give me quite a good deal of information. And then what I can also do here, you'll see up the top, is I can also go in here and I can set queries. So I can go in here and say, okay, which user was the one? So I can filter this down and basically pinpoint the information that I'm after quickly and easily and take this as an aggregated log source. If you do want to integrate it with your SIEM, you go up into the cog up here, you'll see that the option here for security extensions, and you'll see that you have API tokens to allow it to connect via an API. You have your SIEM agents and your playbooks. So the playbooks are basically things like processes or scripts or things that are going to run. Now, one of the option here you'll see is the SIEM agent is to connect to Azure Sentinel, which I've done. So Azure Sentinel is a SIEM agent that Microsoft provides in Azure. This is what you get here. So you'll see you get a nice overview. You're able to get quite detailed logging and reporting. And then basically the way it works is we go in and we set up what's called data connectors. All right, so there's a range of data connectors that are available to you. And one of these you'll see is Office 365. So Office 365, the advantage here is because it's a Microsoft cloud service, you'll see that it can take logs from Exchange and SharePoint, and there's virtually no cost because the login information is already in the Microsoft cloud, so it's going to have that advantage of using that. So if you haven't got a SIEM, I would certainly recommend have a look and have a bit of a read about Azure Sentinel. Certainly highly recommend that as an option. Now we can turn on the logging to the max, as Amy's indicated here. Simple PowerShell commands like this one allow you to add the ability for the mailboxes to set up to be fully auditing, to set all the audits and capabilities. She's also indicated up the top there the banner that I did highlight before. So once again, we're covering off more of the option here. We've talked about the SIEM tool. The other one that's really important that I mentioned is the email policy. So let me quickly go out and show you where those are. So let me go back to my demo tenant quickly. and let me go to my threat management, and let me go to my policies. And in there, you will see that I have what's called ATP, Advanced Threat Protection. That is generally an add-on to most SKUs. But if I go into my anti-spam policy, just to give you a baseline here, hopefully, yep, there we go. Fingers crossed that it comes up. That what I can do here is I have a number of policies. So I have a malware policy, I'll have a spam policy, I'll have a connection policy as well. Now I can go in and configure these. Now, out of the box, they're going to be fairly generic. One of the examples of where it is generic. So if we go in and have a look here at the default spam policy, this is the one you'll get out of the box that Microsoft provides. You'll see here that, for example, it will generally not be blocking international spam. So what that means is if you will this policy here will happily receive emails in any language. A best practice approach is to create your own policy, as I've done here. And when I go into my policies, you'll see here that, for example, I have turned on the ability to block languages, and I can go in and I can determine what languages I don't want to receive. So that's going to cut down on your spam, because typically a lot of spam comes from countries you are not in. Now, if I look at this policy, you'll also see that I can take actions on my bulk spam. Do I want to quarantine it, send it to junk mail, delete it? What's my threshold? So Microsoft has a recommendation of 6 for average threshold, 4 for being restrictive. The default that you get with most tenants is 7. So again, recommended that you go in and have a look and change that to suit. So my advice to you is to have a look at your email policies. You'll see that there are spam policies, there are filter policies, there are outbound spam filter policies, spoof intelligence. So there's a range of policies here. We found those under threat management and inside the policy area. And again, there are other options here, like DKIM for your DNS records that are recommended. Here are your malware policies, and if you do have ATP as part of your environment, you can set that up to provide additional levels of protection as well. All right, so getting towards the end here, probably one of the other things we want to show you is talking about alerts. So if we go up to the alerts option here, you'll see that I can set and control my alert policy. So this is going to tell us when things are happening in our tenant. They're going to let us know when things are like failed logins, when there's malware detected, when things are happening. So if we go in and select one of these, you'll see that this will run. We can turn it on or off. This is what we get out of the box, but we can also go in and create a new policy. All right, and we can, for example, go in here and again, give it a severity level, give it a category level, and then we can go in here and set up the rules for basically when we want to be alerted in there. So recommendation is to sit down and have a think about what alerts make sense for you. Don't create too many alerts because you'll overload yourself. But things like password changes, maybe you want to know about those, or when someone creates a forwarding rule, you probably want to know about those as well. All right, so hopefully I've been able to cover off everything in the list here that Amy has set up for me, plus the additional options that she has added as part of that list and her recommendations. So quickly in summary, MFA for your global admins to start off, MFA for every user. You can look at doing things like using security defaults. You then want to use conditional access, set up your logging on your mailboxes and your environment, make sure that's all enabled, then go in and make sure that you have any alerts set up. Highly recommended that if you haven't got it, look at things like Microsoft Cloud App Security and Azure Sentinel as a way to aggregate a lot of these signals and put them in an easy way for you to manage, monitor, and maintain this environment. Here again is Amy's contact details. Again, best place is amy@thirdtier.net. Again, she apologises for not being able to make the presentation, but again, did have an emergency at the last minute. So hopefully I've been able to at least cover off and do a job for you to give you some of the same information that she was looking to present to you. Here are the speaker feedback and the event feedback items there. I think we have a few moments here for any questions and answers. So I suppose I will call on the moderators to see if there are any questions that have come in the queue that I need to address. All right, I don't see any other questions in the queue here that I can see of. So if someone does have a question, please don't hesitate to type it in. If the moderators also have found any questions they wish to let me know about, please feel free to come off mute and let me know what they are. I don't see any questions in the queue from what I can see, but that may be that I'm not looking in the right place. So again, I will just pause and ask anybody who does have any questions to please type them in the queue. I'll do my best to answer them to show you any environment. Don't forget, like I said, to provide feedback, and again, contact Amy for any questions that you may have on the content of this presentation. And again, apologise that she was not able to do that in person for you. So I'll pause and again, wait to see if there are any questions from the audience out there.